Hello, and welcome back to Void Whispers. Before we dive in, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read every single one, and it means a lot. Just a quick note, in the first 10 minutes you might see 2 to 3 short ads. After that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. If you love dark, emotional horror that pulls at your soul, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1, there are people who are not going to want me saying any of this. I know that before I even begin. There are people who would probably prefer that what happened to my father stayed buried with him, along with everything he saw and everything he survived. Maybe there are even people whose job is to make sure stories like this never reach the public. But I do not care anymore. If there is someone reading this whose father, mother, brother, sister, husband, or wife went through something similar, I need you to know one thing. You were not the only ones. For years, my family lived with the memory of something none of us fully understood. We were expected to accept what we were told, keep quiet, and pretend that nothing strange had happened. We were supposed to believe that my father had simply been hurt during some classified military training accident. But that was not the truth. I know that now. My father served as an operator in a special forces unit during the late 1980s. I will not say which unit, and even now I am not sure how much I am legally allowed to reveal. He rarely talked about his work. That was simply how things were in our family. There were questions you did not ask because you already knew there would be no answer. Most of his deployments were sudden. The phone would ring. My father would listen. Then he would pack his things and leave. Sometimes he was gone for 2 days. Sometimes 4 or 5. Once in a while, maybe a week. We never knew where he went. We never knew what he did. My mother and I learned to live with it. That was the life of being part of his family. But one deployment was different. It happened on July 28, 1987. I had just turned 17 that week. My father and I were supposed to spend the day together. We had planned to go see RoboCop at the movie theater. Dad loved science fiction movies. He enjoyed the action, but what he really loved was making jokes about the characters and pointing out everything he thought was unrealistic. It was one of the ways we bonded. We would sit in the theater whispering comments to each other until Mom told us to be quiet. I remember being excited that morning. Then, the phone rang. There was nothing unusual about the sound itself, just our home telephone. But the moment Dad answered, something changed. I was in the room with him. He said hello, then went completely silent. Usually, during those calls, he would answer with short sentences. Understood. How soon? Yes, sir, things like that. This time he said nothing. He simply stood there holding the receiver to his ear. His eyes were fixed on a point somewhere across the room, but I do not think he was actually looking at anything. He listened for maybe 30 seconds. Then he slowly hung up. My mother asked him what was wrong. He did not answer. He walked straight into the bedroom and closed the door. I remember Mom and I looking at each other. Neither of us said anything. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened. Dad came out wearing a uniform. But it was not the normal uniform he wore when he went to the base. This one was different. No name, no patches, no unit markings. Nothing that identified who he was or where he belonged. I had seen him wear that kind of gear before, but only when he left for for missions he was never allowed to talk about. Mom asked again what was happening. Dad shook his head. Then I heard him quietly mutter something. Said it was in Sap. I do not think he intended for me to hear him. At the time, I had no idea what SAP meant. Years later, I learned that it stood for Special Access Program. From what I understand, these are programs or operations protected far beyond normal classified information. Back then, I only knew one thing. My father looked worried. That frightened me, because I had rarely seen him afraid of anything. Dad was one of those men who always seemed calm. If the car broke down, he fixed it. If a storm knocked out the power, he found flashlights and made jokes. If I was scared, he told me everything would be okay. That day, he looked like he was trying to convince himself of the same thing. He walked over and hugged me. It was not a normal hug, it was tight. Long, the kind of hug you give someone when there is something you want to say but cannot. Then he kissed my mother. She asked if she should drive him to the base. He said no. Someone's coming. About 5 minutes later, a dark SUV pulled into our driveway. It had government plates. 2 men got out. I had never seen either of them before. They were not wearing uniforms. Neither one smiled. Neither one introduced himself. My father picked up his bag. Before walking out, he looked back at us. Then he put his hand on my shoulder. "See, bud, those were the last normal words he said to me for a very long time." Then he got into the SUV. They drove away. The first night was difficult. Usually, even during sudden deployments, Dad found some way to call us before the actual mission began. The calls were always short. "I'm okay. Don't worry. Love you guys." That was usually all we got. But it was enough. This time there was no call. The second day passed. Then the third. Still nothing. The house felt different without him. Too quiet. I know that sounds strange because he had been away many times before. But this silence felt heavier. I remember lying in bed listening to the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Every small noise sounded wrong. Every car passing outside made me wonder if he was coming home. On the fourth day, I sat on the front porch watching the sun go down. I remember thinking that I needed to get out of the house. I thought about taking my bicycle to the convenience store. I did not need anything. I just wanted to move, to do something normal. But I could not make myself leave the porch. Then I heard the telephone ring inside. An ordinary sound. But my entire body went cold. I rushed inside. Mom had already answered. I could not hear the person speaking on the other end. I only saw my mother's face. Her shoulders tightened. Her skin went pale. "Is he alive?" she asked. There was a pause, a long pause. Then my mother began crying, not screaming, not panicking. It was the kind of crying that happens when someone has been holding their breath for days and finally lets it out. She looked at me. There was relief in her face, but there was fear, too. When the call ended, she told me what the person had said. "Your husband is stable. He is receiving treatment." That was it. No name, no location, no explanation. The caller said Dad had been injured. They would not say how. They only told us he would return home when he was cleared. "Cleared of what?" I asked. Mom shook her head. They wouldn't tell me. By the 6th day, my mother could barely sit still. She walked from room to room, checked the phone, looked out the windows. By the 8th day, the tension had become part of the house. Neither of us slept properly. I kept imagining Dad walking through the front door. I pictured him laughing, telling us he had another crazy story he could never share. I imagined him apologizing for missing RoboCop and promising we would see it together the following weekend. But somewhere deep inside, I knew that was not going to happen. Something had changed. My father had been gone on dangerous operations before. But Special Forces missions, at least the ones he disappeared on, were usually fast. They went in. They did whatever they were ordered to do. Then they came home. He was rarely gone longer than a week. This time, he was gone for almost 13 days. After the phone call about his injury, we heard nothing. No updates, no doctor, no commander. Nothing. Then, on the morning of the 14th day, we heard a car outside. A door shut. Mom and I both froze. A few seconds later, came a knock. My mother opened the door. Two men stood outside. One wore military fatigues, the other wore a dark suit. Between them was my father. He was leaning heavily against one of the men. For a moment, I almost did not recognize him. He looked smaller, thinner. His face was pale. His eyes looked sunken. His uniform hung loosely from his body. He looked like a man who had not slept in weeks. Then I saw his arm, or what was left of it. It ended above the elbow. The sleeve had been folded and pinned. Medical gauze and a rigid protective brace covered the stump. I stared at the empty space where his arm should have been. It did not feel real. It looked like someone had simply erased part of him. Dad would not look at me. "Dad?" I whispered. Finally, he lifted his head. He looked directly at me. I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Not just pain. Not even simple fear. It was emptiness. The look of someone who had seen something his mind could not accept. "Hey, bud," he said. He smiled. But it was not his smile. It was only the movement of his mouth. My mother rushed forward and threw her arms around him. She cried against his chest. Dad stood there stiffly. He looked like a ghost. Mom immediately began asking questions. What happened? Where had he been? How did he lose his arm? The man in the suit answered for him. All relevant information pertaining to your husband's injury is classified. What we can tell you is that he suffered a biological containment incident during a training exercise. He received immediate surgical intervention. The action taken likely saved his life. That was all we were given. A biological containment incident. A training exercise. We accepted it because we had no choice. But my father was never the same after that. Of course, anyone who loses an arm during a military operation is going to struggle. I understood that even at 17. What frightened me was not simply that Dad was suffering. It was the way he suffered. He barely spoke. He tried to comfort us. He told Mom he would be okay. He told me not to worry. But he sounded exhausted every time he said it, like he was not really trying to convince us. He was trying to convince himself, and he was afraid of the dark. I noticed it on the first evening. The sun began going down. The light outside slowly faded. Dad kept watching the windows. His breathing changed. His hand began trembling. Then, suddenly he grabbed my mother's wrist. "Get the lights." Mom looked confused. "What? The lights?" His voice became desperate. "Please turn on the lamp. Please, do it now." My mother immediately switched on the lamp. It was not enough. Dad wanted every light in the house turned on. The chandelier, the kitchen lights, the hallway lights, every lamp, the porch light, Everything, Mom and I went from room to room turning them on. Dad watched us the entire time. That night, he closed every curtain. Then he checked every door, every window, every lock. He checked them more than once. I tried to act calm, but seeing my father like that terrified me. The nightmares started 2 nights later. I woke up because someone was screaming. At first, I did not realize it was Dad. The sound was too raw, too desperate. I ran toward my parents' bedroom. My father was still asleep. He was twisting in the bed. Sweat covered his face. My mother was trying to wake him. He screamed the same thing again and again. It wants my blood, then louder. Oh God, it wants my blood. It took Mom almost 3 minutes to wake him. When he finally opened his eyes, he did not know where he was. He pushed himself backward against the headboard. He looked around the room like he expected something to be standing there. That continued for weeks. Sometimes he was afraid to sleep at night, so he stayed awake until sunrise. Then he slept during the day, but even then, he never rested properly. He would toss and turn. He would whisper. Sometimes he moaned like he was in pain. Other times, he repeated one word, feed, again and again. Feed, feed, feed. After a while, things seemed to become a little calmer. Not normal. Never normal. But calmer. I think all 3 of us began pretending that if we did not talk about what had happened, maybe it would eventually disappear. My mother could not do that forever. One night, she sat beside Dad on the couch. The television was playing. Neither of them was watching it. Dad stared at the wall. Mom took his remaining hand. Can you tell me what happened? Dad did not move. She quickly added, not the classified parts. I don't need to know the mission. I just need to know why you're scared. His jaw tightened. Why you won't go near the windows after dark, she continued. Why you can't sleep? Dad pulled his hand away. Don't ask me that. His voice was sharper than I had ever heard. Mom did not stop. What happened to your arm? Her voice broke. You came home without an arm. I deserve to know why. Dad closed his eyes. I can't. You can. No, I'm not asking for military secrets. I'm asking why my husband wakes up screaming every night. His breathing became faster. Please, Mom whispered, tell me what did this to you. Tell me what you saw. No, the word came out like something breaking. Mom froze. Dad was shaking. His fingers dug into the couch cushion. You don't want to know, he said. Mom began crying. Honey, we're scared. I can't help you unless you tell me. Then he said something none of us expected. It talked to me. Mom stared at him. Dad looked down at the floor. It talked, he repeated. His voice was barely louder than a whisper. Whispered to me. He swallowed, like it was mocking me. Then the words started coming out. Fast, broken, like he had been holding them inside since the moment he came home. They were hunting us. Mom said nothing. Dad continued. It was like they knew we were coming, like they could smell us before we even entered. His breathing became uneven. Then they came out of nowhere. I was standing nearby. Dad did not realize I could hear everything. They descended on us. That word stayed with me. Descended, they came from above. His face twisted. One knocked me down. He looked at his missing arm. Everything I said, it repeated. Mom whispered, what? It copied me. His voice cracked. Every sound. Every word. He started crying. It was playing with me. Then he held what remained of his arm close to his body. I tried to push it away. He gasped. Then it bit me. Mom covered her mouth. Dad began sobbing. It was hungry. He looked terrified. It wanted blood. Then he mentioned a name. Rick. I had heard the name before. Rick had been one of the men in Dad's unit. It bit me, and Rick shot it. He pulled me away. Dad suddenly looked toward the darkened window. But then one of those things got him. His voice failed. Oh, God. He pressed his hand over his face. Rick, Mom moved closer. Dad looked at her. The fear in his eyes was something I have never forgotten. I'm the only one who made it out. The room went silent. Then he whispered. I looked back. His entire body shook. I saw it eating him. Mom began crying harder. Dad continued, and it smiled at me. Those words changed everything. Dad slammed his fist against the couch. The lamp shook. You wanted to know what happened? His voice rose. That's what happened. He looked at Mom, then at me. It was the first time he realized I was listening. I watched something that shouldn't exist look me in the eyes. He was crying openly now. I watched it kill my brothers. Nobody spoke. Then, Dad looked down at the stump of his arm. When they finally got me out, they cut it off. Mom stared at him. Dad nodded slowly. They thought I'd been infected. That was all he could say. After that, he collapsed into himself. He kept apologizing. To Mom, to me. He said he was sorry that I had heard everything. He said he never wanted me to know. My father eventually improved. Therapy helped. Time helped. After a year or two, the nightmares became less frequent. Slowly, parts of the old man I remembered began to return. He started joking again. He smiled. Sometimes he even laughed. But his smiles always looked tired. Our family continued sleeping with lights on for years. Dad never went outside after dark unless he absolutely had to. He never returned to active duty. And he never spoke about the operation again. Not once. My father died 3 years ago from heart disease. He was older, tired, but he died peacefully. His family was around him. For a long time after his death, I thought maybe whatever shadow had followed our family since 1987 would finally disappear. Then I went through his old belongings. I found a notebook. It was one he had carried during missions. Inside were handwritten notes, maps, diagrams, and information about the operation. The mission that destroyed part of my father. All my life, I assumed he had been overseas. I imagined some remote country. A terrorist camp. A hostage rescue. Something like that. I was wrong. The mission happened in the United States. My father had been sent to a place called Hellhole Cave, a cave system near Germany Valley in West Virginia. The entire time my mother and I were terrified, wondering what country he was in. He had been less than a day's drive away. His notes were disturbing. There were references to something called Carpathian Strigosa. I do not know if that was the official name of the creatures or simply a military code. There were also repeated mentions of a non-terrestrial viral agent. Not foreign. Not biological warfare from another country. Non-terrestrial. I read that phrase again and again. My father had drawn maps of the cave. There were notes about movement patterns, ambush points, possible nests. He had been trying to understand how his team had been attacked so quickly. Then I found the drawings, the creatures, the things he saw inside that cave. Even now, I do not know what I am looking at. They look human in some ways. But only in the way a nightmare can look almost human. Their arms are too long. Their bodies are thin and strangely shaped. The proportions seem wrong. Their ears are large and almost animal-like. Their mouths are filled with thin, needle-like teeth. Fangs, there are notes near one drawing describing mimicry. They repeat voices. Another says, "Do not answer, calls from darkness." And the wings. Yes, I know how insane this sounds, but my father drew wings, large ones, something like a bat, but longer, more reptilian, almost draconic. I started researching Hellhole Cave after finding the notebook. I learned that public access to the cave had been heavily restricted not long after my father's mission. The official reason involved protecting endangered bats. Bat conservation. Maybe that explanation is completely innocent. Maybe it is true. But after reading my father's journal, I cannot look at it that way. Not anymore. My father lost an arm inside that cave. He lost friends. He lost years of his life to nightmares. He spent the rest of his life afraid of darkness. And I am supposed to believe the only thing inside that cave was a protected population of bats? I do not believe it. The military knows something. Someone sent my father's team into Hellhole Cave in July of 1987. Someone knew enough about what was inside to classify the operation under a special access program. Someone later told my family that a biological containment incident happened during a training exercise. Training exercise. That was the lie they gave us. My father's teammates died. My father was attacked by something that bit him. His arm was amputated because military doctors were afraid whatever attacked him had infected him with something. And they called it training. I am done pretending. I am done protecting people who never protected my family. I am sharing this because I believe there may be other families out there. Other soldiers who disappeared for days or weeks. Other men who returned home, injured, traumatized, or changed. Maybe some never came home. Maybe their families received the same vague explanations. Training accident. Containment incident. Classified operation. Maybe someone else heard the words Carpathian strigosa. Maybe someone else knows about a non-terrestrial virus. Maybe someone else knows what happened inside Hellhole Cave in 1987. If your father came home afraid of the dark, I want to hear from you. If your husband woke up screaming about something that wanted blood, I want to hear from you. If someone you loved disappeared during a classified military operation and you were never told the truth, then understand this. You are not alone. For years, I thought my father was the only survivor. Maybe he was. But that does not mean his family was the only family destroyed by whatever happened. I can still remember that night on the couch. My father's face, his voice, the fear in his eyes when he said the creature smiled at him. Sometimes I wonder if he really escaped that cave. His body did. But part of him stayed there, in the darkness, with Rick, with the other men, with those things. He carried that cave inside him for the rest of his life. Every sunset, every locked door, every light left burning through the night. It all went back to Hellhole. Now, I have his notebook. I have the maps. I have the drawings. I have the names and the strange medical notes they thought would remain hidden forever. I do not know how much of it I understand yet. But I know this. My father did not lose his arm in a training accident. He did not invent those creatures. And whatever happened in that cave was serious enough for the government to bury it under layers of secrecy. Maybe sharing this will cause problems for me. Maybe someone will tell me to stop asking questions. Maybe they already know I found the journal. I do not care anymore. My father spent his life carrying the truth alone because someone told him he had to. I will not do the same. If anyone out there knows what happened in Hellhole Cave in 1987, if you lost someone there, if someone in your family came back changed, or if you have ever heard the words Carpathian Strigosa, then please remember what I am saying. Your family was not alone. Your loved one's sacrifice should not disappear into some classified file. My father deserved better than that. Rick deserved better than that. Every man who went into that cave deserved better. For most of my life, I thought the story ended when my father came home. Then, I thought it ended when he died. Now I realize it may not have ended at all. Somewhere beneath Germany Valley, there is a cave the public is not supposed to enter. Officially, it is closed to protect bats. Maybe that is all it is. But my father's final mission notes tell a different story. They tell me something was waiting in the dark. Something that could hunt trained soldiers. Something that could imitate their voices. Something that drank blood. Something with wings. Something that smiled. And after 39 years, I think it is time the rest of us learned what really happened down there. I am going to find out. Story 2. I live in one of those old brick apartment buildings that were thrown up sometime in the 1950s and apparently never properly renovated after that. You probably know the kind of place I mean. The bricks outside are dark with age. The hallways always smell faintly of dust, boiled vegetables, and someone else's cigarette smoke. And every sound seems to travel through the walls as if the whole building were made of cardboard. The walls are so thin that privacy is almost a joke. I can hear people arguing 2 apartments over. I can hear a baby crying somewhere on the first floor, even when all my windows are closed. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear someone coughing through the pipes. I once told a friend that I could probably hear my neighbor 3 floors below taking a piss. I was exaggerating, but only a little. My apartment is on the top floor, which is the 4th floor if you count the ground level the way we do here. Getting up there means climbing 88 steps. I know because I've counted them. Not once, not twice, hundreds of times. 88 steps from the entrance to my apartment door. When you've lived somewhere long enough, small details like that become burned into your brain. You know which stair creaks. You know where the paint is peeling. You know which window on the 2nd floor landing never closes properly and lets cold air blow into the stairwell during winter. And I knew every one of those 88 steps. I'd counted them while carrying groceries. I'd counted them after work. I'd counted them while drunk, holding onto the railing and trying not to fall backward. I'd counted them while dragging furniture up with friends who swore they would never help me move again. Living on the top floor had some advantages. I didn't have anyone stomping above my head, and the view from my apartment wasn't bad. But the stairs were a nightmare. So when my landlord announced that the building's old elevator had finally been repaired, people acted like we'd won the lottery. The elevator had been broken for years. Apparently, it had stopped working long before I even moved into the building. The doors were still there on each floor, but everyone treated them like part of the wall. I'd walked past them hundreds of times without really thinking about them. The landlord had always said fixing it would be too expensive. Then, suddenly, without much warning, a repair crew showed up. At least, I assume it was a repair crew. I never actually saw them. One week, there was yellow tape across the elevator doors. The next week, the tape was gone. A handwritten note appeared in the lobby. Elevator now in service. That was it. No grand announcement. No explanation. But for the people living above the 1st floor, it was the most exciting thing that had happened in the building in years. The elevator wasn't exactly modern. There was a small metal plaque inside saying it had been installed in 1974. The walls were covered in brown, fake wood panels that looked like they belonged in an old office basement. The ceiling light had a yellow tint, and the whole thing smelled like stale cigarette smoke, damp clothes, and particle board. The buttons were scratched. The mirror had dark stains around the edges. Whenever the doors opened, they did so with a slow metallic scrape. But none of us cared. It worked. For the first few weeks, I loved that thing. I used it constantly. Going to check the mail, elevator, taking out the trash, elevator, coming back with one small shopping bag. Elevator, I could have taken the stairs down easily enough, but after years of climbing 88 steps every day, I felt like I'd earned the right to be lazy. The other tenants were the same. People joked about how quickly we'd become spoiled. But then the elevator started doing strange things. Nothing serious at first. It was slow. Really slow. Sometimes you'd press the button and wait nearly a full minute before hearing it moving somewhere inside the walls. Then the doors would open. Occasionally, the elevator didn't line up properly with the floor. It might stop a few inches too high or too low, forcing you to step up or down when you got out. We all complained about it, but mostly as a joke. Old piece of junk. At least it's better than the stairs. Give it another week and it'll probably break again. That kind of thing. Then I started noticing the sounds. The elevator didn't sound right. I've been in old elevators before. They usually groan, grind, or hum. This one made a different noise. It sounded heavy, especially when it was going upward. There would be a dull thud, then silence, then another thud. Thud, pause, almost like something was pulling it upward in separate movements. I tried not to think about it. Old building, old machinery, that was the explanation. Then there was the other sound, a wet sound, a sort of deep slurping noise. Not constantly, just every now and then. Sometimes, while the elevator was moving, I'd hear it somewhere above me. Other times, it seemed to come from below the floor. It sounded like someone pulling a boot out of thick mud, or like liquid moving through a blocked pipe. The first time I heard it, I actually looked down because I thought there might be water leaking into the elevator. There wasn't. I mentioned it to Jonas. Jonas lived in the apartment directly below mine. He was one of those people who always had an answer. You know the type. Car making a strange noise. Jonas knows what's wrong. Internet slow. Jonas knows why. Government passing a new law. Jonas has already read every article and understands it better than the politicians. You could ask Jonas about brain surgery, and he'd probably explain how the doctors were doing it wrong. One evening, I happened to see him standing near the elevator. We started talking, and I mentioned the strange sounds. He listened seriously. The elevator was moving somewhere behind the wall. Thud, pause, thud, then came the wet sound. That strange slurp. Jonas nodded confidently. Hydraulics. I looked at him. What? Hydraulics, he repeated. These old elevators were retrofitted in the 90s. That sound is probably oil moving through a bad valve. I had no idea whether that was true, but Jonas sounded certain. And honestly, I wanted an explanation. So I accepted it. That explains the slurping? Yeah, air in the line. Oil pressure. Old valve. He shrugged like it was obvious. After that, I stopped thinking about it. Until last night. I came home around 1 in the morning. I'd worked a double shift. I was exhausted. Not normal tired. That deep kind of tired where your body feels disconnected from your brain. It had been raining heavily for hours. My shoes were soaked through. My socks were wet. My jacket was dripping. And I was carrying 2 heavy grocery bags because I'd been stupid enough to stop at a late-night shop on my way home. The plastic handles were cutting into my fingers. I opened the building's front door and stepped into the lobby. The stairwell lights were off. Again, the landlord had promised to fix them. Again, I looked up into the darkness. 88 steps. Absolutely not. The elevator was waiting on the ground floor. Its doors were already open. The yellow light inside looked almost welcoming. I stepped in, put the bags down, pressed the button for the 4th floor. The doors closed. For a second, nothing happened. Then the entire elevator shook. Not the gentle movement you normally feel when a lift begins to rise. This was different. It jerked violently, like a dog suddenly pulling hard against a leash. My shoulder bumped against the wall. What the hell? Then the elevator moved, but not upward. Down, my stomach dropped. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I saw the floor indicator. B, basement, the elevator continued. I hit the 4th floor button again. Nothing. I pressed every button. Ground, 1, 2, 3, 4, nothing responded. I hit the emergency button. No sound, no alarm. The elevator kept moving downward. Then, it passed the basement. That shouldn't have been possible. There was nothing below the basement. At least nothing that I knew about. But the elevator kept going. Down, deeper, I grabbed the railing. The yellow ceiling light flickered. Then I heard it. Thud, pause, my skin went cold. The same sound I had heard during all those elevator rides, except now it sounded different. Now that I was paying attention, I realized something. It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded like effort, like something pulling. Thud, pause, thud, the elevator descended into darkness. Then came the slurping noise. Wet, deep, close, I thought about Jonas. Hydraulic oil, bad valve, air in the line. Suddenly, I didn't believe any of that. The elevator stopped. There was a heavy impact beneath my feet. A dull thump against what sounded like solid concrete. The light above me flickered twice. Then, went out. Complete darkness. I stopped breathing for a second. Then I saw a faint glow. There was a small window set into the elevator door. I'd never paid much attention to it before because it normally showed nothing but the inside of the elevator shaft. Now there was light outside. Weak yellow light. Coming from somewhere beyond the door. I stood completely still. The smell hit me next. Mold, damp concrete. Old sweat. Something sour. Something rotten. It was disgusting. I remembered the strange smell I'd sometimes noticed inside the elevator. I'd always assumed it was smoke, dirty clothes, or old building materials. Now I understood, or at least I thought I did. The smell reminded me of a body. Not a dead body exactly. More like a person who had not washed in years. A person who had been sweating and working underground for decades. I slowly moved toward the small window. My legs were shaking. I looked through. There was a room outside. A real room. Somewhere beneath the basement. Bare concrete walls. Rusty pipes. A naked light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And beneath that light stood someone. A man. At least, I thought it was a man. He had his back to me. He was wearing an old janitor's uniform. The kind of dark work jumpsuit you'd expect to see in an old factory. It hung loosely from his body. far too loosely. He was unbelievably thin. His shoulders were narrow. His legs looked like sticks inside the fabric. For one terrible second, I thought I was looking at a skeleton dressed in clothes. Then, he moved. He was holding something. The elevator cables. Both hands were wrapped around them. I stared. My brain refused to understand what I was seeing. The cables disappeared upward into the ceiling. The man's arms were wrong. Too long. Much too long. They hung almost to his knees. His hands were wrapped in dirty gray duct tape. Not just one layer, dozens of layers. The tape was black, with grime. The edges were stained dark red and brown. Then the man coughed. A horrible, wet cough. He bent forward. Something moved deep inside his chest. Then came that sound. Slurp, my blood turned cold. It wasn't hydraulic oil. It had never been hydraulic oil. It was him. The wet sound I had heard riding the elevator. It was coming from his lungs. The truth hit me so suddenly that I nearly fell backward. The elevator wasn't moving by itself. Maybe it never had been. Every time I'd ridden upward, thud, pause, thud, someone had been pulling. This man, this thing, he had been lifting the elevator, lifting us, again and again. And tonight, instead of pulling me upward, he had brought me down. The man slowly released the cables. The metal lines shifted and groaned. Then he turned around. I wish he hadn't. His face looked ancient. Not old in a normal way. Old like something that had been left underground for too long. A huge gray beard covered his chin and chest. It was tangled with dust. His cheeks were sunken. The skin stretched tightly across his bones. His eyes were the worst part. Deep, black, empty. There was no anger in them. No excitement. No madness. Just exhaustion. Pure exhaustion. He looked like someone who had been working the same job for 1,000 years. He began walking toward the elevator. Slowly, one step at a time. I backed away from the window. My body told me to run. There was nowhere to go. The elevator was a metal box. The doors were closed. The emergency button didn't work. My phone had no signal. I looked around for something I could use as a weapon. Groceries, an umbrella, my keys. Nothing. The man reached the door. His face appeared on the other side of the glass. Up close, he looked even worse. There were dark cracks in his lips. His beard moved slightly with every breath. His eyes stared directly into mine. He raised one hand. It was enormous. The taped palm pressed against the glass. Slowly, he dragged it downward. Squeak! The sound made my teeth hurt. His breath fogged the window. Then his mouth opened. His voice was barely human. It sounded dry and wet at the same time, like gravel being dragged through mud. He swallowed. You are heavy today. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even scream. He lowered his hand. Then he pushed his fingers into the narrow gap between the elevator doors. I stepped backward until my shoulders hit the mirror. No, I whispered. He pulled. The doors began to open. Not because of a motor, not because of machinery. He simply forced them apart with his bare hands. Metal groaned. The gap widened. I stared at those long fingers. I was certain he was coming inside. I thought he was going to kill me, maybe tear me apart, maybe drag me into whatever underground place this was. The doors opened completely. The man stood there. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then, his body sagged. He leaned heavily against the doorframe. Not like a predator, like an exhausted worker finishing a long day. He looked down at his hands. Then he began removing the duct tape. Rip, the sound echoed through the concrete room. Rip, one layer, then another and another. The tape was stained. Some of it stuck to his skin. He pulled harder. I heard a wet tearing sound. I looked away. I didn't want to see. But I looked back anyway. I wish I hadn't. His hands were destroyed. There was almost no normal skin left. The palms were covered in thick scar tissue. Fresh wounds had opened across older wounds. His fingers were cracked. Some places looked burned. Others were bleeding. The cables had eaten into him over the years. Or decades. Maybe longer. He stared at his ruined hands. Then he reached into one of the pockets of his janitor's uniform. For one insane second, I thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a roll of duct tape. Brand new. Still wrapped in plastic. He removed the plastic slowly. Then he reached into the elevator. Toward me. I pressed myself harder against the mirror. He wasn't trying to grab me. He was offering me the tape. I shook my head. No. He continued holding it out. No. His arm did not move. I looked at his face. Nothing changed. Finally, with a shaking hand, I took the roll. It felt completely normal. Cold, plastic, real. The man lowered his arm. Then he raised his other hand. The raw one. Blood slowly ran down his fingers. He pointed inside the elevator. At first, I didn't understand. Then I followed his finger. He was pointing at the metal plaque above the buttons. I'd seen that plaque 1,000 times. I'd stared at it while waiting for the doors to open. I'd read it without ever really thinking about the words. Installed 1974. Max load 3 pers. The old man looked at me. Those empty eyes held mine. Then he spoke. I've done my shift. He slowly pointed toward the elevator cables behind him. Then toward the roll of duct tape in my hand. Now it's yours. Story 3. It had been 3 days since I arrived. 3 days since I had signed the papers. 3 days since I had agreed to an offer that, at the time, had sounded strange, but simple. Stay inside a controlled environment. Follow the rules. Complete the study. Walk away with $1 million. That was how they had explained it. They never said it would feel like prison. There were 5 of us taking part in the experiment, though I had not seen any of the others since arriving. Each of us had been placed inside a separate concrete cell. The rooms were spaced far enough apart that we could not hear each other through the walls. There were no shared meals, no group meetings, no conversations through doors. Our only contact was through letters. The guards delivered them. Every day, at different times, a bell would ring somewhere outside my cell. A guard would appear silently, slide an envelope through the opening in the door, and continue walking. They never spoke. Not once. I had tried asking questions on my first day. Where were we? How long would this last? What exactly were they studying? The guard had simply looked through me as though I wasn't there. The room itself was small and unpleasant. Gray concrete walls. A narrow bed with a mattress so thin that I could feel the metal beneath it. A small wooden table. A chair. A toilet in the corner. And one tiny window high on the wall, covered with bars. The place smelled cold. That sounds strange, I know, but that is the only way I can describe it. The air carried the smell of damp concrete and metal, with a faint chemical scent that made the whole room feel sterile. There was nothing comforting about it. Nothing personal. Nothing alive. Then, on the third day, I received my first proper letter. The bell rang. A moment later, an envelope slid beneath the door. I picked it up and opened it. The message inside read, "Hello, dear contestant. I am Dr. Abner of the Eleutheria Foundation. I will be your head psychiatrist for this study and will mediate all notes and letters sent." That was all. I read it again. The language felt strangely cold, clinical, detached, too formal for something involving 5 people locked inside cells. Head psychiatrist. The words bothered me. I had not known there would be a psychiatrist involved. I had assumed this was some kind of isolation study, maybe a psychological experiment about loneliness or communication. I had signed so many pages that I could barely remember every detail. Most of the documents had been filled with legal language. Risk, consent, observation, compensation, privacy. The only part I had truly focused on was the amount of money. $1 million. That number had made everything else seem unimportant. I placed the letter on the wooden table beside my bed. Then I sat there. Time passed slowly. It might have been 3 hours. It could have been more. Inside that room, time was already becoming difficult to measure. Eventually, another bell rang. A second letter arrived. This envelope was different. The paper was clean and crisp, and when I opened it, I noticed the faint smell of pine. Fresh, natural, it reminded me of forests. The letter read, "Salute, friend. How are you this evening? I hope well. Within this letter, you may find a key. Make sure to keep it safe." At the bottom, someone had signed, "With love, your dear friend Charles." I smiled slightly. Charles, whoever he was, he had an unusual way of writing, almost old-fashioned, but he seemed friendly. I checked the envelope again. Inside was a small silver key attached to a piece of string. I held it between my fingers. It was real, not plastic, not decorative. A real metal key. I wondered what it opened. The door? A box? A locker? Maybe it was part of the experiment. I tied the string around my neck and let the key rest beneath my shirt. For the first time since arriving, I felt as though something had actually happened, something unexpected. I walked toward the tiny window. Daylight was fading. A thin strip of orange light remained in the distance. Soon, darkness replaced it. Then the bell rang again. Another envelope. This one felt completely different. The paper was rough, colorful, and strangely cheerful. It smelled faintly of cotton candy. I opened it. The handwriting inside was wild and uneven. Hello, friend. How are you?" Smiling, clearly, I sure hope so. Then the sentence stopped. I frowned. I turned the paper over. More writing covered the back. The letters were larger now, more aggressive. "Friend, it is important to smile. At all times. You should never stop smiling." I stared at the message. Something about it made my stomach tighten. The words themselves weren't threatening. Not exactly. But the way they were written felt wrong. Desperate, obsessive, I lowered the letter. Then I noticed something else inside the envelope. A drawing. It was simple. 2 stick figures. One had an enormous smile. The other looked like a sad clown. The smiling figure was holding the clown's hand. I studied it for a while. Was this a puzzle? A joke? Maybe the participants had been told to act like different characters. Perhaps this was all part of the study. I wanted to believe that. Then the final bell of the evening rang. I got into bed. The mattress was as uncomfortable as always. I closed my eyes. But I kept thinking about the message. You should never stop smiling. The words followed me into sleep. The next morning, another bell woke me. A letter had already been pushed beneath the door. The envelope was pale green. When I opened it, I smelled fruit. The message read, "Hello there. I'm not sure why we say hello in letters, but still, I'm sure you're lovely to meet, I hope." I paused. The writer seemed nervous, more normal. The letter continued, "Will we ever meet? I'm not sure. It's so lonely here." Then, at the bottom, I'm James. James, another contestant. I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. For a moment, I considered writing back. That was when I realized something. No one had explained how. There was paper on the table, there was a pen, but where did I send it? Did I leave it by the door, give it to the guard? I had never tried. Before I could decide, the bell rang again. Another pine-scented envelope appeared. Charles, I opened it. "Hello again, friend. It's Charles. I haven't heard back. Are you able to send messages?" I felt guilty. Apparently, he had been waiting for a response. I continued reading. "It doesn't matter, friend. Do you still have the key?" Without thinking, I reached toward my neck. The string was gone. So was the key. I sat completely still. I checked the bed, the floor, beneath the mattress. Nothing. My pulse quickened. I had gone to sleep wearing it. Had it fallen off? Had someone entered the room? The letter continued. "It's all right if you have the guards take things at night. Best to keep your hopes up, friend. With love, your friend Charles." I read that sentence several times. "If you have the guards take things at night." Was he suggesting the guards had taken it? I had never heard the door open while I slept. Then again, I had no idea what happened after the lights went out. I placed the letter down. Another envelope waited nearby. Bright paper. Cotton candy. I already knew who it was. "Hello, hello, hello." Guess who forgot to sign their name? Me. Isn't that silly? Isn't that fun? I didn't smile. The message continued. "I'm Pierrot." Attached to the back of the letter was a small lollipop. Below it were the words, "Enjoy, friend." I didn't eat it. I placed it beside the letters. For the next several hours, I paced. My cell seemed smaller with every passing minute. I thought about my old apartment. It had been cramped. The heating barely worked in winter. The neighbors were loud. I had hated it. Now I missed it. I imagined returning there with $1 million. A better apartment, maybe a house. No debt, no worries, a new life. That was what kept me from panicking. The money. I told myself I could survive anything for $1 million. Then the bell rang. A laminated sheet slid across the floor. I picked it up. "Hello, contestant. After the next night, one of you will be eliminated. Each night, one of you will pick who." My hands went cold. I kept reading. "Only one will remain. Smile, dear contestants. Smile, that was it." I stared at the page. Eliminated, what did that mean? Removed from the study? Sent home? Lose the money? Something inside me immediately rejected that explanation. The wording felt darker. Only one will remain. I suddenly remembered Dr. Abner's letter. Head psychiatrist. Not researcher. Not supervisor. Psychiatrist for the first time. I truly wondered what kind of experiment I had joined. Night came quickly. I barely slept. The next morning, rain tapped softly against the small window. The sound comforted me. It was the first normal sound I had heard in days. For a few minutes, I simply listened. The rain reminded me that the outside world still existed. Then breakfast arrived with another letter. The envelope was pink. It smelled like strawberries. "Hello, are you well?" The message began. I'm Lottie. Why did you sign for this? I'm asking everyone. I thought it would be nice to hear what you're all like. I sat on the edge of the bed. Why had I signed? Money. The answer seemed simple. But it suddenly felt shameful. $1 million. I had seen the number and stopped asking questions. I had convinced myself that financial freedom was worth almost anything. But was it? I looked around the cell. Maybe money had not bought my freedom. Maybe I had sold it. I placed Lottie's letter with the others. Hours passed. The rain continued. At some point, I thought I heard music. Very faint. Maybe from outside, maybe from another building. A soft melody drifting somewhere beyond the walls. It made me strangely emotional. I missed conversation. I missed hearing someone laugh. I even missed traffic. I had always thought of myself as someone who enjoyed being alone. But this was different. Being alone by choice was freedom. Being forced into silence was something else entirely. The bell rang. Another pine-scented letter. Charles, hello, friend. Still silent, I see. That's okay, I understand. Did you hear the news? One will be eliminated tonight. Stay safe, my friend. I wish to hear from you tomorrow. At the bottom, with love, your dear friend Charles. I folded the letter. Eliminated tonight. I paced again. I had no idea who would choose. Was someone randomly selected? Could it be me? What exactly were we choosing? The more I thought about it, the less the $1 million mattered. Then the bell rang again. Cotton candy. Pierrot, I almost didn't open it. Hello? Did you hear the news? Is it you, friend, who will eliminate someone? You wouldn't do that to silly old M.E. Right? Right? My chest tightened. On the back was another drawing. The same two figures. A smiling person. A sad clown. Holding hands. Only now, I wondered if the smiling figure was comforting the clown. Or controlling him. The final letter of the night arrived soon after. Crisp, formal, lemon-scented. Bonsoir, valued contestant. We here at the Eleutheria Foundation would like to wish you a good night. Smile, I hated that smile. I got into bed. My body was exhausted, but my mind would not stop. Then I heard it. A gunshot. Distant, but unmistakable. My entire body froze. The sound echoed through the corridor. Seconds later, the intercom crackled. A cold voice spoke. Contestant eliminated. Sleep well. I couldn't move. Someone was dead. The realization came slowly. Eliminated had not meant being sent home. It meant killed. One of us had just died. Maybe James, maybe Lottie, maybe Charles, maybe Piero. I didn't sleep at all. The gunshot repeated in my mind. Again, letters arrived. The bells rang. I ignored them. Eventually, after what might have been 3 hours, I forced myself out of bed. Something had changed. The window was covered. Completely no daylight. No rain, no outside world. I had no way to know what time it was. I opened the letters. The first was from Charles. Friend, are you quite all right? What was that? Do you know? Another from him followed. Everything is so silent now. Nature is so amazing, isn't it? I used to explore, you know. I'd love to explore once more. Perhaps there is a way to escape. I'll write you soon, friend. Escape, the word stayed with me. The next letter smelled like strawberries. Lottie, I spoke with the guards. I asked them to give you this cake. Maybe it would help. There was no cake. I searched outside the envelope. Nothing. Had the guards taken it? Had there ever been a cake at all? Was Lottie even real? I suddenly wondered whether any of them were. Maybe the Foundation wrote every letter. Maybe there were no other contestants. Maybe the gunshot had been recorded. The thought made me feel sick. Then I opened another envelope. Cotton candy. Pierrot, but the handwriting was different. Clean, controlled, almost calm. I'm sorry, I can't act anymore. I leaned closer. This foundation, it's so very wrong. Named after a god of freedom, yet obsessed with studying entrapment. I swallowed. I know I'm next. I've left you a way out. Don't trust anyone. The letters can and will be changed. By him. By him. Who? Doctor? Abner? The guards? Charles? I reached inside the envelope. My fingers touched metal. A small silver key. The same key Charles had sent me. The one that disappeared during the night. I stared at it. How had Pierrot gotten it? Unless the guards had taken it from me and moved it. Or unless Charles had never sent it. Maybe Pierrot had. Maybe none of the letters were arriving unchanged. I heard movement outside. I quickly hid the key beneath a candle that had been delivered earlier. My heart raced. Something was happening. Something was breaking apart. Then, 2 more letters arrived. The first was from Charles. Friend, we must leave tomorrow, he described a plan. A possible escape. I read every word carefully. Near the end, he wrote something personal. Dear friend, if you are still alive, and I hope you are, mayhaps we can explore together. I used to wander the forests at night when I was younger and explore the world when I became an adult. Of course, that was very expensive and put me into deep debt. I was hoping this could pay. I stopped reading. Debt. That explained why Charles had joined. The same reason as me. Money, hope, desperation. For the first time, he felt completely real. I pictured him somewhere nearby. Another person trapped inside another concrete room, maybe holding his own letters, maybe thinking about forests, maybe dreaming about freedom. I wanted to trust him. I needed to trust someone. The second note was from Pierrot. The colorful paper was stained dark red. Blood. The handwriting was weak. Only 2 words. I'm sorry. Then the intercom came alive. Contestants, one of you has taken the easy way out. However, by the rules, this does not count as an elimination. Another will be chosen. I felt my stomach drop. Pierrot, he had killed himself. Or they wanted us to believe he had. And it didn't count. Someone else still had to die. I stood in the center of my cell, staring at the wall. 5 contestants. 1 had been shot. Pierrot was dead. That left 3. Me, Charles, and either Lottie or James. Unless the first eliminated person had been one of them. I didn't know. That was part of the cruelty. They never told us who was gone. They left us guessing. Hours passed. Or minutes. Without the window, I couldn't tell anymore. Then, around what I believed was midnight, another gunshot echoed through the building. I closed my eyes. The bell rang. This time, footsteps stopped directly outside my door. I heard the lock. The door opened slightly. A guard stood there. For the first time, instead of sliding the letter beneath the door, he handed it to me personally. The envelope was pink, covered in blood. Strawberries, Lottie, my hand shook as I took it. The guard closed the door. I didn't need to open the letter. I already understood. Lottie was gone. Maybe she had been chosen. Maybe she had tried to escape. Maybe she had known something. Either way, there were only 2 of us now. Me and Charles. I sat on the bed, and pulled the silver key from beneath the candle. The metal felt cold in my palm. Charles had a plan. Pierrot had warned me not to trust anyone. Dr. Abner controlled the letters. The Foundation could change anything we wrote, anything we received. For all I knew, Charles's escape plan could have been fake. Maybe Dr. Abner had written it. Maybe Pierrot's warning was fake. Maybe Lottie had never existed. Maybe I was the only real contestant. But the blood on the envelope looked real. The gunshots sounded real. And the fear inside me was definitely real. I held the key tightly. Tomorrow, Charles wanted to escape. Tomorrow, one of us might be eliminated. Only one would remain. I finally understood the true purpose of the experiment. It wasn't simply isolation. It wasn't about communication. It wasn't even about fear. It was about hope. How much could a human being endure as long as they believed there was still a way out? How long could hope keep someone alive? A person could survive hunger. Cold, silence, loneliness, fear. But hope was different. Hope could keep you moving even when everything else had been taken. Maybe that was what the Eleutheria Foundation wanted to study. Not how quickly hope died, but how slowly it starved. I looked at the locked door, then at the key. Somewhere beyond those walls, Charles might have been doing the same. Two people remained. Two people who had joined because money had promised them freedom. And now, freedom itself had become the only prize that mattered. I didn't care about the $1 million anymore. I didn't care about my old apartment. I didn't care about debt. I just wanted to see daylight again. I wanted to hear rain. Real rain. I wanted to stand in a forest and smell pine without wondering whether the scent had been added to a letter by someone watching from behind a camera. I wanted to hear another person's voice. I wanted to know that Charles was real, but most of all, I wanted to live. I wrapped my fingers around the silver key. The lights outside my cell continued to hum. Somewhere in the building, a bell rang. And for the first time since I arrived, I did not wait for another letter. I waited for morning. Or whatever passed for morning in a place where they had taken away the sky. Freedom is never truly absolute. Perhaps that is unfair, but complete freedom without limits could easily become chaos. Still, the opposite is just as frightening. A world where every choice is controlled, every movement watched, and every human being treated like a subject instead of a person is its own kind of nightmare. Institutional cruelty does not always begin with violence. Sometimes it begins with paperwork, a signature, a promise, an offer that seems too good to refuse. People accept because they are desperate, because they are afraid, because they hope their suffering will eventually lead to something better. But every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves some level of freedom. Isolation has always frightened me. So has silence. I think more people fear those things than they are willing to admit. Human beings are social creatures. We search for voices in the dark. We write letters. We hold on to names. We imagine strangers as friends because sometimes the idea that someone else is there is enough to help us survive another night. Everyone has fears. In some ways, the most frightening things are not always the monsters created by someone else. Sometimes the worst fear is the one you already carry inside yourself. You already know what frightens you. You know what you cannot bear to lose. You know what kind of darkness would finally break you. That is why hope matters. Because when everything else disappears, hope may be the last thing left. And sometimes, hope starves slower than the body. Story 4. We spent most of that afternoon walking up and down the side of the highway, searching through tall weeds and dry grass while the summer sun beat down on us without mercy. The heat seemed to rise from the pavement as well as fall from the sky, trapping us between two burning surfaces. Sweat ran down my back, and every few minutes, one of us complained about being thirsty. The funny thing was that there were 5 of us, and not one of us had thought to bring water. But we were young, stubborn, and convinced that nothing bad could happen to us. Deb was the first to spot something useful. There, she shouted. We hurried over and found a dead armadillo lying near the edge of the road. It was surprisingly intact. There was some damage, but compared with most of the roadkill we had found that summer, it looked almost perfect. Clay crouched beside it. Think it'll fit? I studied the body for a moment. No way. Jamie disagreed at first, but after looking at the size of the shell, even she admitted it would probably be too big. We moved on. A little farther down the road, Arnold suddenly stopped, found something. The rest of us walked over. At first, I saw nothing. Then Arnold pointed down into the weeds. There was a cat, or what remained of one. It had been run over so badly that its body was nearly hidden by the tall, prickly grass. The poor thing had been crushed almost flat. It looked only slightly thicker than a pancake. Good eye, I told Arnold. He smiled proudly. What do you think, Ben? Everyone looked at me. I nodded. This one will work. That was all we needed to hear. We began the walk back toward the old mansion. The place had been abandoned for longer than any of us had been alive. The previous winter, every real estate agent in town had apparently agreed to stop trying to sell it. Before then, someone would make another attempt every 10 years or so. Usually, they tried to convince some outsider to buy it. Someone new to the county who had not yet heard all the stories. No one local wanted it. Our town did not have many wealthy people, and anyone rich enough to restore a massive old mansion probably had enough sense not to move there in the first place. Sometimes, expensive cars passed through town. A Rolls Royce, a Porsche, maybe some businessman or wealthy tourist who had taken a wrong turn. They usually left as quickly as they had arrived. Driving fast around our town was dangerous, though. Most of the roads twisted through forests and hills, bending so sharply that you could never see what was waiting around the next curve. Accidents were common. The mansion itself was even worse. It was a giant hole that swallowed money and work. Even if someone had repaired the roof, replaced the windows, cleared the mold, rebuilt the floors, fixed the plumbing, and removed the years of rot, they would still have had to deal with the woods. The property was surrounded by thick forest. At night, owls called from the trees. Dead branches reached toward the sky like the fingers of giant skeletons. The deeper you went into those woods, the farther away the rest of town seemed. Naturally, we thought it was the perfect place for a secret clubhouse. The whole property was surrounded by old fencing and rusted barbed wire. There were signs warning people not to enter, but we barely noticed them anymore. We had found several places where the wire was loose enough to crawl underneath. Tetanus shots were not exactly high on our list of concerns. Arnold took the flattened cat from me so I could lift the wire. Then he held it higher for Deb. She passed underneath without getting her sundress dirty. Jamie rolled her eyes. The last time she had gone through, she had been forced to crawl through mud. Nobody complained about Arnold giving Deb special treatment. It was obvious that he liked her. obvious to everyone except Arnold himself. That was also why Deb knew our secret. Before that summer, the Resurrection Club had only included me, Arnold, Clay, and Jamie. But Arnold trusted Deb, and since the rest of us liked her too, we eventually agreed she could join. That afternoon would be her first time seeing the ceremony for herself. The front doors of the mansion were almost completely hidden behind ivy. Green vines had spread across the stone and brick, wrapping around columns and covering windows. The golden door knocker was still there, though no one had used it in decades. There was no reason to knock. The door was never locked. Anything valuable had been removed years earlier. Furniture, paintings, silverware, even some sections of decorative wood had been taken away and sold. After that, the adults had abandoned the place and left it to the weather. Arnold held Deb's hand as they stepped inside. Outside, the heat had been unbearable. But the moment we crossed the doorway, cool air surrounded us. Deb shivered. The mansion smelled like wet wood, dust, and mold. Most of the rooms were empty. The furniture that remained had been destroyed or stripped apart. We sat on the floor when we wanted to rest, though we had learned to check carefully first. Rusty nails and broken pieces of wood stuck out from places that looked harmless. The wallpaper had begun peeling away in long strips. Some pieces hung from the walls. Others lay curled across the floor like old orange peels. Still, we loved the place. There were huge empty rooms where we could run, argue, play games, and spend hours without a parent suddenly appearing and telling us to clean our rooms or come home for dinner. The mansion had problems. A lot of them. Some areas smelled so strongly of rot and mold that Clay and Arnold sometimes tied bandanas around their mouths. I never did. I liked the smell. To me, it smelled like freedom. Deb looked around the room. Then she stuck out her tongue in disgust. In one corner, a large spider had caught a fly. The spider was busy drinking what was inside it. Clay noticed too. His face went pale. Jamie leaned closer, interested. I ignored them. "Let's get this over with," I said. "I'm tired of carrying this cat." We made our way deeper into the mansion. Once, a beautiful spiral staircase had climbed through the second, third, and fourth floors. Now only a few marble steps remained. After those steps, there was nothing. The staircase simply ended. None of us had ever been upstairs. The floors above were probably too dangerous anyway. Sometimes I wondered if that was part of the reason the magic worked. Maybe the secret depended on us never seeing what happened above us. We entered the kitchen. I can still remember exactly what the dumbwaiter looked like. It was a small metal box built into the wall. The chamber was rectangular, about a foot wide and perhaps a foot and a half tall. 2 ropes hung beneath it. Pulling the right rope raised the dumbwaiter. Pulling the left brought it back down. At least, that was how it was supposed to work. Sending something upward was always difficult. Sometimes one person could do it. Usually it took 2. For heavier things, 3 of us had to pull together. Bringing the box down was much easier. Everyone except Deb had already used it, so we decided she should have the honor. I placed the flattened cat inside. Deb grabbed the rope. For such a small girl, she was surprisingly strong. She pulled. The mechanism groaned to life. Somewhere inside the walls, wheels began turning. We heard gears grinding and chains rattling. Despite the age of the mansion, the dumbwaiter always moved smoothly along its hidden tracks. Soon, the box disappeared above us. We waited. That was part of our ceremony. We always left whatever we had placed inside up there for a minute or two. No one knew why. It simply felt right. Then Deb pulled the other rope. The box began descending. As it reached us, we heard something from inside, a yowl, then scratching. Deb's eyes widened. We all smiled. She opened the door. The cat that had been crushed almost flat was standing inside. It looked completely normal. Its body had somehow been restored. Bones, organs, skin, fur, everything. The tabby stepped out, stretched, and immediately began licking itself, as though nothing unusual had happened. Then it started purring. Deb stared in amazement. We all began arguing over who should keep it. After several rounds of rock, paper, scissors, Jamie won. That was how things worked during that strange summer. None of us had planned for it. I had not been the first kid to enter the mansion. That had been Jamie. I had not discovered the dumbwaiter. Clay had found it. But I had been the first one to play with it. The first time I entered that old kitchen, I had been bored. A meal had not been prepared there in 50 years. Everything was dusty and empty. The dumbwaiter was just something interesting to touch. So I pulled the right rope. The chain moved over a wheel hidden somewhere above. I heard grinding. The metal box seemed empty. At least, I thought it was. Then I noticed something lying on the tray. A dead housefly. Tiny, worthless, the kind of thing most people would sweep away without thinking. I decided to send it up. The fly weighed nothing, so raising the box was easy. I pulled the rope as far as my skinny arms could manage. Eventually, I heard a muffled clatter from somewhere inside the wall. The dumbwaiter had reached the top. Then I gently pulled the left rope. I was careful. I did not want to break our new toy. The box returned mostly on its own. As it reached the kitchen, I heard something inside. Buzzing, I opened the door. A living fly crawled along the metal wall. I stared at it. June was full of flies, of course. They were everywhere outside. But the mansion itself was strangely empty of insects. Maybe it was the cool darkness. Maybe it was the mold. We sometimes saw spiders, but even most of their webs looked old. I told myself the fly might have come from upstairs. Perhaps the upper floors were full of insects. Maybe one had simply entered the dumbwaiter. But there was one problem. The dead fly was gone. I called the others. We decided to test it. Arnold searched for something bigger. Eventually, he found a dead spider. There were webs everywhere in the mansion, although most seemed abandoned. Good old Arnold still managed to find one. I miss him, even now. We put the spider into the dumbwaiter. I raised it. We waited. Then we brought it back. A living spider crawled out. The fly, luckily, had already escaped. Jamie immediately wanted to poke the spider with a stick. For science, she said. None of us boys wanted to go near it. Jamie laughed. You're all a bunch of big babies. Looking back, that should have told us something about Jamie. There were signs, small ones at first. Maybe if we had understood them earlier, a lot of people could have been spared a great deal of pain. But we were children, and we had discovered magic. The experiments continued the next day, then the day after that. We knew almost nothing about religion or miracles. We had no idea whether the dumbwaiter was powered by God, ghosts, demons, or something from the place adults said smelled like rotten eggs. We did not care. It worked. That was all that mattered. We began with small animals. Earthworms were easy to find. They crawled onto sidewalks during cool mornings and dried beneath the summer sun before noon. We collected the dead ones. After a trip through the dumbwaiter, they returned alive. We released them into wet soil. It felt good. We were saving things. Naturally, our ambitions grew. We started competing to find larger animals. The size of the dumbwaiter limited us. Everything had to fit inside. One rule never changed. Every animal we brought was already dead when we found it. None of us killed anything. We swore we never would. We also promised never to tell anyone. The last thing we needed was someone like Tyler discovering our secret. Tyler was the kind of bully who would probably shoot an animal just to see whether the dumbwaiter could bring it back. Then he would probably shoot it again. His friends Andy and Hunter would laugh. So we stayed quiet. Deb was different. Everyone trusted Deb. Arnold trusted her most of all. We should invite someone else into the Resurrection Club, Clay suggested one afternoon. More people means more eyes. We could find more animals. Ooh, Deb said in her bright voice. Let's invite Margot. She's cool. She wouldn't think our mission was gross. Jamie made a face. Fine, but not Aaron. He's too weird even for us. We never got the chance to add anyone. Maybe we should be thankful for that. As the weeks passed, we discovered more ways to use our secret. Whenever someone in the neighborhood had an old or sick pet that needed to be put to sleep, we understood what that meant. We also knew there was no magical farm upstate where old dogs and cats went to live happily forever. Whenever possible, we found the body before it was cremated or buried. We took it to the mansion. Then we returned the animal to its family. Imagine being a child who had spent the night crying because your dog had died. Then the next day, your dog came walking home. Alive, healthy, happy. The parents never seemed to understand what had happened. Maybe the mother assumed the father had secretly bought an identical animal. Maybe the father thought the mother had. We never explained. Wild animals were more difficult. We felt sorry for all the raccoons, possums, cats, rabbits, and other creatures killed along the roads. But we learned to wear gloves. Being brought back to life did not make wild animals grateful. Arnold always seemed offended by that. Once, a resurrected raccoon nearly bit him. We saved you. He shouted as the animal ran away. Jamie shrugged. It's just instinct. Animals that did not immediately escape were placed in Clay's little red wagon. Then we carried them into the woods, far away from roads, far away from cars. We wanted them to have another chance. Arnold resurrected a turtle and refused to release it. He kept it as a pet. Considering how long turtles can live, I sometimes think that animal may still be alive. It may have outlived Arnold. Stray cats and dogs were easier. We gave them to other children in town. Those kids never knew where their new pets had come from. They did not need to know. For a while, someone suggested we could sell some of the animals. Our allowances were small. Extra money sounded nice. Jamie was the first one brave enough to suggest it seriously. The rest of us voted against her. The Resurrection Club was supposed to help, not make money. Eventually, Arnold, Clay, and I started experimenting with things that were not animals. I found rotten fruit in the dumpster behind a grocery store. We put it through. When it came back, the fruit was fresh, completely fresh. No mold, no brown spots, no smell of garbage. Apples became crisp again. Oranges smelled sweet. I gave everything to the food bank at my parents' church. If the food spoiled before someone ate it, I figured we could always bring it back again. That summer, the five of us smiled a lot. We honestly believed we were doing something good. Maybe we were. For a while. We were still in grade school, but we were smart enough not to make our activities obvious. We never walked to the mansion together as a full group. 5 children entering the woods every afternoon might attract attention. Someone might follow us. So we traveled alone or in pairs. By July, we had begun daring each other to bring stranger things. My father had a stuffed bird displayed at his workplace. One day, I stole it. I think it was a canary. It was yellow anyway. Jamie laughed when I brought it. It won't work. Why not? It's not really a bird anymore. It's just feathers stretched over some frame. We put it inside. When it came back down, the bird was alive. Its glass eyes had fallen out. They rolled across the metal floor like marbles. Real black eyes had grown in their place. The bird immediately flew from the box. It circled the kitchen once before finding its way up an old chimney. We heard it chirping happily as it escaped. Jamie leaned against the counter. Huh, then she smiled. Maybe this thing can bring anything to life. At our next meeting, she brought a wooden doll. She seemed disappointed by the result. Technically, the dumbwaiter did bring it back to life, just not in the way she expected. The doll did not become a little wooden person. It did not dance. It did not talk. Instead, the wood became alive. Paint cracked and fell away. Green branches pushed from the body. The legs became roots. Small leaves began growing. Jamie threw a fit. She wanted her doll back. But the dumbwaiter's work could not be reversed. We planted the little tree outside where it could get sunlight. It is still there. At least, I have been told it is. I heard Clay still visits sometimes and trims away the dead branches. Clay's own experiment involved a rock. The stone contained fossilized seashells. We had no idea how old they were. Thousands of years? Millions? When the dumbwaiter returned, the shells were alive. That discovery gave Deb an idea. She brought amber jewelry. Inside the amber were ancient insects. It was a terrible mistake. The magic revived them. But it did not remove the amber. We watched the yellow-orange stones begin to buzz. Tiny legs moved inside. Compound eyes turned. The insects were alive again, trapped exactly where they had died, unable to escape. Eventually, they stopped moving. Clay could not decide whether the experiment had succeeded or failed. Jamie said we should go get ice cream. Arnold believed he had discovered the ultimate experiment. His father worked at a gas station, and Arnold managed to steal a small can of oil. I heard this stuff is ancient, he told us, like millions of years old. And I heard it used to be dinosaurs. We stared at the can. A dinosaur sounded incredible. Hiding one from our parents would have been difficult, but that was a problem we were willing to deal with later. We raised the can. We waited. Then we lowered it. No dinosaur. No animal at all. Ferns had begun growing from the container. Apparently, prehistoric plants looked a lot like normal plants. So boring, Jamie complained. Arnold looked disappointed. I really thought it would be a dinosaur. I hope Pa doesn't find out I took his gas for nothing. Deb smiled and patted his back. It was still a good try. By the end of July, we started wondering what would happen when school returned. Would the Resurrection Club end? I don't see why it should, Clay said. The Resurrection Club lives forever, Deb announced. Jamie suggested resurrecting a cheeseburger. Clay pointed out that it seemed wasteful to bring back only one small piece of a cow. Just wait until Thanksgiving, Jamie said. I'll bring a whole turkey back. I rolled my eyes. If it fits. One afternoon, we returned to the highway. We had found good roadkill there before, including Jamie's cat. Deb was reaching toward a dead baby armadillo when a police car passed. The officer slowed down. His window came down. He shouted at us. The words he actually used were much worse than anything our teachers would have said. "What are you kids doing with that dead animal? Don't you know how many germs are in that thing?" Technically, everything he said sounded like a question, but he clearly did not want answers. Every sentence sounded like an angry command. Then he drove away. Deb remained calm. Jamie and I were angry, but neither of us said much. Clay and Arnold were terrified. The officer frightened them more than any teacher threatening detention ever had. After that, we decided the highway was too risky. We began searching the country roads. Those roads were dangerous in a different way. They twisted sharply through the woods. You could never tell when a car might come racing around a bend. But the trees were thick. If someone appeared, we could run into the forest and hide. The countryside was too far to reach on foot. So, we used our bicycles. Then came the day that changed everything. It had been a perfectly normal summer day. There was nothing strange about it, nothing that warned us. I walked into the middle of a 2-lane country road because I had spotted a dead dog. From what was left of it, I guessed it had been a small breed, maybe a pug. One of those friendly little dogs people carried around and let sleep in their beds. The skull was crushed, but the collar remained. There was a phone number. Somewhere, a family was probably searching for their missing pet. They had no idea what had happened. I picked up the body. Deb stood nearby with her backpack open. I should have handed it to her immediately. Instead, I stood there, imagining what would happen after we resurrected the dog. I pictured myself returning it to the owner. They would cry. They would offer me money, and I would heroically refuse. "No," I imagined myself saying, "I don't want anything. Seeing you reunited is enough." That foolish fantasy nearly killed me. Headlights suddenly burned against the back of my head. Someone screamed. I turned. A large truck was coming straight toward me. The driver swerved. He avoided me. But the road curved sharply. The truck left the pavement and crashed directly into a wall of evergreens. The sound was enormous. Metal crushed. Glass exploded. Birds flew from the trees. For a moment, none of us moved. Then everyone started shouting. Deb stared at the wreck. "You know," she said slowly, "that truck looks like the one my daddy drives." Her face changed. "What if?" She ran toward it. The rest of us followed. She looked through the shattered windshield. The airbag had not opened. Then she screamed. "It is my daddy." Her voice became higher than I had ever heard it. A painful sound. A sound I still hear sometimes. Cell phones existed then, but ordinary people did not carry them around. The ones we had seen were huge things that looked like bricks. Mostly, businessmen owned them. So the four of us jumped onto our bikes. For once in our lives, we wanted to find a police officer. Deb stayed with her father. She checked for a pulse. "It really doesn't look that bad, Daddy," I heard her saying as we rode away. I do not know whether he could hear her. We reached the nearest house with a telephone. It belonged to Clay's grandmother. We called for help. We did not give our names. I did not know the word anonymously then. But that was what we did. Then, Arnold led the race back toward the crash. Jamie, Clay, and I followed him. We wanted to help Deb. We wanted to know if her father was alive. By the time we returned, emergency vehicles were everywhere. An ambulance, police cars, sirens, flashing red lights. The entire road had been blocked. Signs warned drivers to turn around. For a moment, I felt relief. Adults were there now. Doctors would help. Police would handle everything. We could not see Deb. Then Arnold noticed one of the officers. It was the same policeman who had yelled at us about the dead armadillo. Without speaking, all four of us turned our bicycles around. We rode home. Later that day, our parents came into our rooms one by one and told us what had happened. When my mother told me that Deb and her father had been taken to the hospital, I pretended to be surprised. She watched my face closely. She talked about sending me to someone called a therapist. At that age, I had no idea what that was. The word sounded frightening. Soon enough, I learned. The members of the club had already agreed on our story. We had not been near the accident. We had seen nothing. We knew nothing. In my case, that meant hiding the worst part. The accident was my fault. If I had not been standing in the road, Deb's father would never have swerved. For 2 days, we heard nothing from Deb. None of us went outside to play. August was already beginning. Summer vacation would soon end. Normally, we would have been desperate to enjoy every remaining day. Instead, each of us stayed home. It was as though we had all placed ourselves in separate punishments. Maybe we knew we deserved it. After 2 days, Clay was the only person who wanted to return to the mansion. What if the magic doesn't last forever? He asked. What if it runs out? Maybe every time we use it, there's less. The next animal could be the last one. We should make it count. He knew a child whose hamster had been sick for a long time. The hamster had finally died. We can help, Clay said. None of us felt excited. For the first time, the Resurrection Club seemed dangerous. Someone had already been hurt, maybe worse. We were also terrified of getting caught. We talked about juvenile detention. Juvie, the word, frightened us. Jamie did not seem especially worried. Then Arnold agreed with Clay. What he had not told us was that Deb had called him. I sighed. Staying away from home almost seemed safer anyway. At any moment, our parents might discover the truth. Maybe the police would call. Maybe Deb would tell someone. Arnold was certain she would not betray us. So, for different reasons, we agreed to go. Clay collected the dead hamster. As usual, we separated before entering the woods. The mansion had always been our sanctuary, a place where we could escape parents, chores, bullies, and the summer heat. That day, I hated looking at it. The building seemed different, darker, as though it had been waiting for us to make a mistake. When we entered, someone was already there. Deb, everyone except Arnold was surprised. She looked terrible. Her face was pale. Her eyes were tired. She looked as though she had not slept in days. But she was smiling far too much. She wore a backpack. It looked heavy. Arnold immediately offered to carry it. Deb refused. Then she began telling us what had happened. Yeah, we got to ride in an ambulance, she said. The siren was really loud. It hurt my ears. None of us spoke. When we got to the hospital, Mommy was already there. Deb's smile continued. The doctors did everything they could. My stomach tightened. But they said Daddy wasn't going to make it. He got hurt too badly by his own truck. Deb, I whispered, I'm so sorry. She looked at me. For a moment, I wondered if she knew. Did she know I had been standing in the road? Did she know her father had crashed because of me? It's okay, Ben. She was still smiling. Mommy started crying into all these tissues. Then I started crying, too. Her voice trembled. But because Mommy was crying so much, she didn't see me leave. No one moved. I went looking around the hospital. Deb slowly removed one hand from her backpack strap. I found one of those skinny knives the doctors in green shirts use. My breathing stopped. It was really sharp. She held up one finger. A bandage was wrapped around it. I cut myself a little. Arnold stared at her. "What did you do?" Deb looked at the dumbwaiter. The smile on her face began to shake. I knew Daddy wouldn't fit. Silence filled the kitchen. I knew the dumbwaiter was too small to bring all of him. Tears appeared in her eyes, so I had to choose the most important part. Arnold's face went white. "What is in the backpack?" The short hair of his crew cut seemed to stand upright. I looked at the fabric. There were dark stains, red-brown stains. "Please tell me that's ketchup," I whispered. Clay dropped the hamster. It hit the floor with a soft thud. Jamie looked at Deb. Then she smiled. "Well," she said, "let's go upstairs and see what happens." None of us stopped her. I wish we had. Deb opened the backpack. I looked away. We placed what she had brought into the dumbwaiter. It took all 5 of us to pull the rope. Whatever power existed above us had never failed. Not once. Every dead thing that traveled up returned alive. We followed the same ritual. Raise it. Wait. Lower it. That time I wanted to break the ritual. I wanted to leave the dumbwaiter upstairs forever. I think Arnold did too. Clay certainly did. For the first time since we had discovered the mansion's secret, I prayed that the magic would fail. Maybe there were limits. Maybe human beings were different. Maybe whatever lived inside the walls would refuse. My prayer was not answered. Jamie grabbed the left rope. Deb helped her. The dumbwaiter began to descend. Gears turned. Chains rattled. The familiar mechanical sounds filled the kitchen. I had heard them dozens of times. They had always made me excited before. Now they sounded like something dragging itself closer. The box reached us. Deb ran toward it. She opened the door. Then she cheered. A happy, relieved sound. The rest of us stared. Arnold backed away. Deb reached for his hand. He pulled his arm from her. Clay covered his mouth with both hands. His eyes were wide. "I don't know what he's saying." Jamie tilted her head. She looked almost curious. "Well, of course you can't hear him," she said. Nobody answered. Jamie continued calmly. "Deb's dad might have a tongue, but he doesn't have lungs. Without lungs, there's no air. Without air, he can't make sounds." Deb wiped tears from her cheeks. Her father's severed head sat inside the dumbwaiter. Alive, his eyes moved. His mouth opened and closed. The skin had been repaired. The crushed parts of his skull were restored. But there was no body. No chest, no heart, no lungs, only the head. "But he still has ears," Deb whispered. She leaned closer. "So he can hear me." Her voice broke. "I love you, Daddy." She kissed the top of his head. Forever and ever. I could not move. His eyes were wide. They darted between us. His jaw continued opening and closing. Again. At first, the movements seemed random. Then I understood. I took a step backward. "Wait," everyone looked at me. My voice was shaking. "I know what he's doing." Deb looked confused. "What?" I stared at the living head, at the terror in his eyes, at the desperate movement of his mouth. The same movement repeated endlessly. If he had lungs, if he had a throat connected to a body, if he had breath to push through his vocal cords, the kitchen would have been filled with sound. But there was only silence. I felt cold. Colder than I had ever felt inside that mansion. "I can tell what he's trying to do with his mouth," I whispered. Deb's smile disappeared. "He's screaming." Story 5. When I was very young, something terrible got into my blood. That was how I understood it as a child. I did not know much about sickness, medicine, hospitals, or death. I only knew that I was always tired, that I bruised too easily, and that my father was constantly taking me to doctors who wore white coats and spoke in quiet voices when they thought I could not hear them. Later, I learned the word for what was killing me. Leukemia. My father took me everywhere he could think of. We visited local hospitals first, then bigger hospitals in other cities. He spoke to specialists, filled out forms, waited in endless hallways, and spent money we did not really have. I remember the smell of disinfectant, the cold touch of medical equipment, and the way nurses always tried to smile at me even when their eyes looked sad. My father kept promising that we would find someone who could help. Eventually, though, he ran out of money. My aunt told him that all we could do was pray harder. My father did not take that well. I still remember the anger in his voice. "God let my child get leukemia," he said. "I'll take my chances with the devil." At the time, I thought he was only angry. Years later, I began wondering whether that sentence had somehow acted like an invitation. I never learned where my father found the business card. I asked him about it once, but after everything changed, he had no memory of the card at all. According to him, it had never existed. But I remember it. It was plain. There was no logo, no address, and no description of what kind of business it belonged to. Only two things were printed on the front: A. Kindley, and a phone number. My father called the number. He told me later that a woman answered. He asked where the business was located. She gave him an address. He asked about opening hours. She told him when to come. That was all. A few days later, my father took me there. The neighborhood was not a nice one. Even as a child, I could tell that much. Most of the stores had metal bars covering the windows. Some buildings were covered in graffiti. Several shops were empty, their windows dusty and their signs faded. There were cracks in the sidewalk, trash caught against the curbs, and the whole street seemed quieter than it should have been. The strange shop sat between a chiropractor's office and an abandoned ice cream parlor. It was so narrow that, at first, I thought we had the wrong address. There was no sign above the door. No name. No advertisement. Nothing. The building looked almost impossible, as if someone had taken a normal shop and squeezed it until it was thin enough to fit into a space that had never been meant to hold anything. Every window on the street seemed to have bars over it, except that one. I remember thinking that whoever owned the place must not have been worried about thieves. Once we went inside, I understood why. There was not much that an ordinary thief would want. I had been inside pawn shops before. My father sometimes visited them when he needed money. Other times, he looked for cheap tools or electronics. Most pawn shops had glass cases filled with jewelry, watches, coins, knives, and sometimes guns. This place had none of those things. Its shelves were filled with jars, hundreds of them. The liquid inside was clear and slightly yellow, and objects floated within it. At first, I assumed they were animal parts. My older cousins had once told me about dissecting frogs in science class. I thought perhaps the shop sold strange medical specimens. Then I saw a jar full of human fingers. After that, I stopped trying to convince myself the contents were from animals. There were teeth, pieces of skin, something that looked like part of an ear. One jar held what I was almost certain was a human tongue. Another contained several small bones, some things I could not identify. Even now, I am glad I was too young to understand what all of them were. A bell above the door rang when my father and I entered. A moment later, a man stepped out from a back room. I immediately stared at him. He wore a black mask. It covered most of his face and had a long, pointed beak like the head of a bird. At the time, I thought it looked like something from a costume party. Years later, I learned that it resembled an old plague doctor mask. A tall, black hat rested on his head. The rest of his clothes did not match the dark mask at all. His coat and trousers were bright red and purple, mixed together in loud patterns that almost hurt to look at. He looked like someone who could not decide whether he wanted to attend a funeral or perform in a circus. Only his lips were visible beneath the mask. They curled into a smile. "Salutations," he said cheerfully. "I'm Mr. Kindley." My father stepped forward. "I spoke with your assistant on the phone." "Mr." Kindley became still. "My assistant?" The woman who answered. "Mr." Kindley breathed in sharply. The sound was strange, almost like a crow calling. "I have no assistant." My father frowned. There was definitely a woman. "It's only me here." "Mr." Kindley tilted his head downward. His eyes looked up at us from behind the mask. The whites around them became very visible. It reminded me of a dog that knew it had done something wrong. My father made a small sound in his throat, but did not continue arguing. I looked around the shop again. "What is this place?" I asked. My father quickly told me to be quiet. "Mr." Kindley laughed. No, curiosity is perfectly natural in children." He leaned against the counter. "You see, little one, everyone has something they wish they could remove from their life." I stared at him. He continued. "For some, it's an illness. For others, an addiction. Perhaps a terrible memory, a personality trait, a mental obsession, an unwanted responsibility, guilt, a curse, an object they cannot destroy." He spread his arms toward the shelves. "Everyone who comes here wants something gone." My father looked at him carefully. "And you can do that? I don't ask why people come. That isn't my concern. My role is simple. I take away the thing they no longer wish to have." Then Mr. Kindley pointed toward a wall. A large sign hung there. At the time, I did not understand most of what was written on it. I was only a child, but somehow I remember every word. I remember them better than I remember the names of some people I have known for years. The rules explained that the purpose of the place was to cause pain and spread fear, and that every customer had to be told this openly. They said that more than one business like this could exist in the same area, and that employees of those businesses were expected to treat one another politely. Younger establishments had to respect older ones, and no employee was allowed to harm another employee. The rules did not belong to the shopkeeper. They did not belong to the customers. They could not be changed. According to the sign, the rules existed outside of time itself. Customers were even encouraged to search for loopholes because, according to whoever had written the rules, watching people fail to find one was amusing. People could describe their deals however they wanted, but the shop could never give anything. It could only take. There was no limit to what could be taken. It could remove something physical, something emotional, something impossible to touch, something spiritual, something that did not seem real. But whatever a customer offered had to belong entirely to that customer. The shop did not want souls. One line specifically warned customers to keep their souls because the business had no use for them. Payment could not be negotiated. The price was determined by how much suffering it would cause the person paying it. The more painful the loss, the more valuable the payment. No one could pay for someone else. The person receiving the service had to pay the price personally. Nothing removed could ever be returned because it was not stored. It was destroyed. And after the deal was completed, no one except the customer would remember how things had been before. Not family, not friends, not even the shopkeeper. The final rule was the shortest. The shop always took its pound of flesh. My father slowly read the sign. Then he looked back at Mr. Kindley, pain and fear, he said quietly. Mr. Kindley nodded. My father took a deep breath. Fine, there was no fear in his voice. If you can do what you say, I'm ready to make my deal with the devil. Mr. Kindley suddenly placed a hand against his chest. He looked deeply offended. The devil? He shook his head. No, I've always tried to avoid politics. My father stared at him. Mr. Kindley smiled again. I'm only a pawnbroker. He explained that the shop did not accept money. No dollars.